My name is Claire Whitmore, and I am 32 years old. 3 weeks ago, in a ballroom full of polished silverware, expensive perfume, and people who had known my family for decades, my father lifted a microphone, smiled at me like I was a stain he had learned to tolerate, and destroyed the last piece of patience I had left for him. It was his retirement celebration, the kind of event people in our town talked about for months before it happened. Crystal chandeliers, champagne towers, white roses on every table, nearly 200 guests in tailored suits and satin dresses, all gathered to applaud the great Nathaniel Whitmore, founder and chairman of Whitmore Freight Solutions, the man who had built a regional transportation company into what everyone called a legacy. When he began introducing his family from the stage, the room softened. People leaned forward. They smiled for his wife, smiled for my stepbrother, smiled for the grandchildren of cousins I barely knew. Then the spotlight found me at the back table near the kitchen doors. My father looked right at me and said, "And of course, there's Claire. No degree, no real career, still floating through life, but every family has one, right?" The room laughed. Not politely, not uncomfortably. They laughed because they trusted him, because men like my father know how to wrap cruelty in charm and make everyone else feel clever for joining in. I did not cry. I did not lower my head. I did not give him the satisfaction of seeing me break. I stood up, lifted my glass of champagne, and said, clearly enough for the microphone to catch it, "Congratulations, Dad. This will be the last time anyone in this family sees me." Then I placed the glass down, picked up my purse, and walked out while 200 people fell silent behind me. What happened after that is the reason I am telling this story now. But to understand why I left that ballroom with no intention of ever going back, you need to know what my family did to me long before that night. I grew up in Westport, Connecticut, in a house with blue shutters, a circular driveway, and a front lawn that was never allowed to have a single brown patch. From the outside, the Whitmores looked like the kind of family people envied. My father wore custom suits and served on charity boards. My mother, before she died, hosted dinner parties with handwritten place cards and fresh flowers from the garden. We had framed family portraits, a country club membership, vacation photos from Nantucket, and a reputation for being respectable. Respectable is an interesting word. It can mean honest, it can mean decent. In my family, it meant that everything ugly had to happen quietly. My mother, Laura, died when I was 8. Ovarian cancer took her fast, brutally fast, the kind of fast that leaves a child believing adults are lying when they say everything will be okay. I remember her voice more than her face. I remember the way she smelled, like lavender soap and vanilla tea. I remember that she used to kneel in front of me before school, smooth my hair with both hands, and say, "You are stronger than you know, Claire, but you should never have to be strong alone." After she died, my father became quiet for exactly 6 months. Then he married Vivian. Vivian arrived with perfect hair, pearl earrings, and a son named Preston, who was 11 years old and already understood that the world would bend if he expected it to. I was 10. Within a year, the house no longer felt like mine. Vivian redecorated the rooms my mother had loved. Her china replaced my mother's dishes. Her photographs appeared on the mantel. Preston's soccer trophies crowded the shelves where my childhood books used to be. Nobody announced that I had been moved to the edges. Nobody sat me down and said, "You are less important now." That would have been too honest. Instead, it happened in tiny, polished ways. Preston's school events became family obligations. Mine became schedule conflicts. Preston's report cards went on the refrigerator. Mine were glanced at and set beside the mail. Preston got a new car for his 16th birthday. I inherited a dented sedan with a heater that worked only when it felt charitable. Preston was introduced as our future. I was introduced as Claire, Laura's daughter, as if my mother's death had turned me into a guest who had overstayed her welcome. My father was not a man who screamed. That was part of what made him dangerous. People imagine cruelty as loud, obvious, easy to identify. In our home, cruelty wore cufflinks. It sat at the head of the dinner table and asked about everyone's day except mine. It corrected my posture, dismissed my interests, and called neglect discipline. When I got into the University of Michigan with a partial scholarship, my father smiled for the admission letter photo and then told me not to get too impressed with myself. When I chose business analytics because I wanted to understand logistics, systems, and strategy, he said, "That field is more demanding than people think, Claire. Don't be embarrassed if you need to change majors." The only person who ever looked at me as if I might become something was my grandmother, Beatrice Whitmore, my father's mother. Grandma Beatrice was sharp, elegant, and impossible to intimidate. She lived in a brick townhouse in Boston and called me every Sunday evening without fail. She asked what I was reading. She remembered my exam dates. She mailed me books with notes in the margins. She never said my father was wrong directly, not when I was young, but she had a way of saying, "People who underestimate you are giving you privacy to become dangerous," that made me sit taller. I did not understand then how much she knew. I did not understand how carefully she was watching. Years later, after everything had already been stolen from me, I would learn that she had been trying to protect me all along. The day my father took my future and handed it to Preston, I was 20 years old. I was halfway through my sophomore year, carrying a 3.86 GPA, working part-time in the campus library, and applying for a summer program in London that I had dreamed about since high school. I was tired in the way ambitious students are tired, but I was happy. I had built a life where no one looked through me. My professors knew my name. My friends thought I was funny. For the first time since my mother died, I had begun to imagine a future that belonged only to me. Then my father called and told me to come home for a family discussion. I knew, before I even packed my bag, that something bad was waiting. In my father's house, family discussion meant that a decision had already been made and my presence was required only so they could call it agreement. He was in his study when I arrived, sitting behind the mahogany desk he treated like a throne. Vivian stood beside him, one hand resting lightly on his shoulder. Preston lounged in the leather chair near the window, pretending not to be interested. My father did not waste time. He said Preston had been accepted into an elite MBA program at Wharton, that it was a once-in-a-generation opportunity, that the family had to make strategic choices. Then he folded his hands and told me I would need to take time away from school. Just for a year, he said, maybe 2, until things balanced out. Preston's career, he explained, would strengthen the entire family. My education could wait. There are moments when your body understands betrayal before your mind can organize it into words. I remember the air leaving my lungs. I remember staring at a framed photograph of my father shaking hands with a governor. I remember Vivian saying, softly, as if she were offering comfort, "A girl can build a perfectly good life without finishing a business degree. You are attractive, Claire. You will marry well." I asked my father about the promise he had made my mother. I knew he had made it because I had heard her ask him in the hospital. She had been thin by then, almost translucent, but her voice was fierce when she said, "Promise me Claire will have every chance." He promised. He looked at me across that desk and said, "Circumstances change." Preston did not even look ashamed. That was when a small, stubborn part of me died, and another part of me, harder and quieter, was born. I did not scream. I did not beg. I asked whether there was truly no other money. My father's face closed. "Do not make this harder than it needs to be," he said. So I packed my dorm room, withdrew from school, and left Michigan with 2 suitcases and the kind of silence that does not mean surrender. It means memory. For a while, I disappeared. Not dramatically. I did not leave a note or change my name. I simply stopped expecting anything from them. I moved to Boston with $1,700 in savings and rented a narrow studio above a dry cleaner in Allston. The windows rattled when trucks passed. The radiator hissed like an angry animal all winter. I slept on a mattress on the floor for 5 months because buying a bed felt irresponsible. I worked mornings at a bakery, afternoons as a receptionist for a small freight brokerage, and nights teaching myself everything I could not afford to learn in a classroom. Supply chain modeling, route optimization, warehouse management, operations finance, Python basics, contract structures. I found free university lectures online, downloaded old textbooks, and built spreadsheets until my eyes burned. I did not tell my family. When Vivian sent a birthday card signed Dad and Viv with a $100 gift card inside, I mailed it back without a note. That was not pride. It was survival. If I took even one small thing, they would use it forever as evidence that I could not stand alone. My first real chance came from a man named Arthur Bell who owned a freight brokerage where I answered phones. Arthur was gruff, impatient, and allergic to excuses. He also noticed everything. One evening, after everyone else had left, he found me correcting a scheduling error that would have cost the company a client. He stood behind me for a full minute, watching the spreadsheet recalculate, then said, "Who taught you to do that?" I thought I was in trouble. I said, "No one." He grunted. "Good. People who teach themselves usually learn the parts other people skip." The next week, he moved me from reception to operations support. 6 months later, I was handling small accounts. A year after that, clients were asking for me by name. I learned how companies bleed money through bad routing, lazy vendor contracts, inefficient warehouse flows, and executives who would rather buy software than understand their own problems. By 26, I had saved enough to start my own firm. I called it Northline Strategy Group. It was not glamorous at first. It was me, a borrowed conference room, a laptop with a cracked corner, and 3 small clients who cared more about results than pedigree. I kept my name off public-facing materials. Officially, Northline was represented by counsel, account directors, and later by a CFO named Elias Grant, who became my closest professional ally. People thought secrecy was a branding choice. It was not. It was protection. I knew my family. If they found out I was building something, they would either claim they had supported me or try to prove it was not real. My grandmother Beatrice died when I was 30. I had not seen my father in person for years by then, except at distant family events where we performed politeness like actors who hated the script. At her funeral, I sat 3 rows from the back and listened to my father praise her devotion to family. I remember looking at the stained glass window above the altar and thinking that if heaven had a sense of humor, my grandmother was rolling her eyes. 3 days later, I received a call from a Boston attorney named Miriam Vale. She said she had represented my grandmother's private estate and needed to meet with me. I assumed there were papers to sign, maybe a keepsake, perhaps one of the books Beatrice and I had loved. Instead, Miriam led me into a conference room, placed a folder in front of me, and told me my grandmother had established an irrevocable trust in my name several years earlier. The balance was $850,000. I stared at her as if she had spoken in another language. Then Miriam handed me a letter in my grandmother's handwriting. My hands shook so badly I could barely open it. "My dearest Claire," it began, "I know what was taken from you. I know about the school fund, the lies, and the way your father dressed selfishness as necessity. I fought him until fighting no longer changed anything. This money is not a gift, it is a correction. Use it to build the life you were always meant to have. Do not waste your energy proving your worth to people committed to misunderstanding you. Build quietly, stand firmly, and when they finally realize who you are, let the truth speak first. I have always seen you. Love, Grandma B. I cried in that conference room in a way I had not cried since childhood. Not because of the money, though the money changed everything, but because someone had known, someone had witnessed the theft and refused to let it be the final word. I used part of the trust to expand Northline. I hired analysts. I leased a modest office. I invested in software, legal protection, and the kind of infrastructure that made clients trust us before they understood why we were better. The rest of the trust I left untouched, not because I needed it, but because it felt like my grandmother's hand on my shoulder. By the time my father sent the invitation to his retirement gala, Northline had 15 employees, a Harbor View office, and annual revenue just under $4 million. We specialized in operational restructuring for freight and distribution companies. We were discreet, effective, and difficult to access without a referral. And here is the part that still feels too strange to say out loud. One of our largest clients was Whitmore Freight Solutions, my father's company. 3 years earlier, Whitmore's board had hired Northline after a competitor recommended us. My father never met the owner. All communication went through Elias, our legal team, and account managers. Northline rebuilt their routing systems, renegotiated carrier contracts, redesigned 2 warehouse flows, and saved them millions. At conferences, my father praised Northline as the best strategic partner his company had ever found. He called us indispensable. He called our leadership brilliant. He had no idea he was praising the daughter he had told everyone was drifting through life. When the gold-edged invitation arrived, I left it on my kitchen counter for a week. Nathaniel Whitmore requests the pleasure of your company in celebration of 40 years of leadership and his retirement from Whitmore Freight Solutions. I could have thrown it away. I almost did. But something in me knew I needed to go. Not for reconciliation, I had stopped wanting that years earlier. Not for closure, because closure is often something people demand from the person they wounded so they can feel forgiven without changing. I went because I wanted to see one final time whether my father could stand in a room full of witnesses and treat me with basic human dignity. Some foolish, quiet part of me wanted to be wrong about him. That part did not survive the evening. The gala was held at the Larchmont Club, a place so committed to tradition that even the carpet seemed inherited. I wore a deep green silk dress, simple and fitted, with my grandmother's pearl earrings and a watch I had bought for myself after Northline crossed its first million in revenue. I did not dress to impress my family. I dressed to remind myself that every piece of my life had been earned. Vivian met me near the entrance with a smile as sharp as a paper cut. She kissed the air beside my cheek and looked me up and down. "Claire," she said, "you made it. Your father worried this might not be your sort of event anymore." I smiled. How kind of him to worry. Her gaze lingered on my dress, my shoes, my bag. I watched her trying to calculate whether they were real. That was Vivian's talent, converting people into price tags and then pretending she valued character. Inside, the ballroom glowed. White flowers, candles, champagne, executives, bankers, old friends, distant relatives. Preston stood near the stage with his wife, laughing too loudly. He had my father's posture and Vivian's eyes, always searching for the most useful person in a room. He was scheduled to take over as CEO in January, a fact he mentioned every 6 minutes to anyone trapped within range. My seat was at table 19, near the service corridor, with a retired neighbor, two people from Vivian's garden committee, and a cousin's adult children who did not know who I was. I looked toward the family table and found no empty chair. It did not hurt exactly. Pain requires surprise, but I noticed. I had become very good at noticing. A waiter offered champagne, and I accepted because my hands needed something graceful to do. Across the room, my father spotted me. He gave a brief nod, the kind one gives to a colleague from a committee, then turned away. I sat there, listening. That is what invisible daughters learn to do. People underestimate how much information they give to someone they do not consider important. Near the bar, my father spoke with a shipping executive about market pressures and succession planning. Then I heard him say, "Northline has been a game changer. I don't know who their principal is, but whoever built that firm understands logistics better than half the people in this industry." The executive asked whether he had ever met the owner. My father laughed. "No, they're private. Frankly, as long as they keep saving us money, I don't care if they operate out of a cave." I took a sip of champagne to hide my expression. At that exact moment, my phone vibrated. Elias had texted, "Whitmore renewal proposal came in. 5-year extension, higher retainer. They want confirmation soon." I typed back, "Hold until Monday. Tonight we'll decide." Family members began circling me after the first course. Aunt Marjorie, Vivian's sister, appeared with a glass of wine and the expression of someone approaching a charity case. "Claire, darling, I almost didn't recognize you. Boston agrees with you, apparently. Are you still doing office work?" "Consulting," I said. "Operations strategy." "How nice," she replied, in the tone one uses for a child's drawing. "And are you seeing anyone? Your father worries about you being alone at your age." Before I could answer, Uncle Peter joined us and said, "Nathaniel mentioned you never quite settled after leaving college. These things happen. Not everyone follows a straight path." There it was, the family script. I could almost see my father distributing it before I arrived. Claire is fragile. Claire never finished school. Claire is still finding herself. Claire must be handled gently, but not taken seriously. Aunt Marjorie lowered her voice. "Your father said you struggled emotionally after Michigan. I think it's brave that you came tonight." I looked at her for a moment, really looked at her, and understood that she did not hate me. She simply believed the version of me that required nothing from her. "I'm doing very well, better than ever." She patted my arm. "Of course you are, dear." I excused myself before my smile became something sharper. Preston found me later on the terrace. The night air was cool, and the golf course beyond the stone railing looked silver under the moon. I had gone outside to breathe, but apparently peace was too much to ask for. "There she is," he said, stepping beside me, "the mysterious runaway." I did not turn. "Hello, Preston. Dad's speech is coming up. Vivian asked me to make sure you weren't planning some emotional scene." I laughed once, quietly. Interesting concern considering I've barely spoken all night. He leaned on the railing, close enough that I could smell his expensive cologne. "You always did like being the victim." I turned then. Preston was wearing a midnight blue tuxedo, a watch worth more than my first car, and the confidence of a man who had never been told no by anyone who mattered. "Is that what I was? A victim? You left school and ran off because Dad made a practical decision. You've punished everyone for it ever since." "I didn't punish anyone. I left." "You sulked, you disappeared and played businesswoman in Boston. What is it you do again? Some little consulting thing." His smile widened. "Careful with that. People like you take risks and call it independence until the bills come due." I should have felt angry. Instead, I felt strangely calm. "After tonight?" I told him. "You will wish you had asked more questions before opening your mouth." He laughed because he thought I was bluffing. Men like Preston always think a woman is bluffing when she speaks without trembling. When the lights dimmed and my father stepped onto the stage, the room erupted. He stood there soaking in applause like a man being crowned. He thanked clients, employees, mentors, regulators, industry partners, old friends. He spoke about grit, vision, loyalty, and sacrifice as if he had invented all four. He called Vivian his anchor, and she dabbed at her eyes with theatrical precision. He called Preston the future of the company, and the room stood to applaud while Preston waved like a prince accepting tribute. Then my father looked toward the back of the room. I knew before he said my name. Something in his face changed. The warmth became performance. The performance became cruelty. "And we cannot forget my daughter Claire," he said. The spotlight swung toward table 19. No degree, no traditional career path, still figuring out life in her own special way, but she came tonight, and that's something. Maybe there's hope yet. A few people chuckled. My father enjoyed the sound, so he pushed further. Every family has a free spirit, or a freeloader, depends on the day. That was when the room truly laughed. It rolled over me, warm and ugly. People I had known since childhood laughed into their champagne. People whose companies had benefited from my work laughed because my father gave them permission. My hand did not shake. I remember being proud of that. I waited until the laughter thinned, then stood. At first, people smiled because they expected me to play along. Then the room realized I was not smiling in the right way. My father's expression tightened. I lifted my glass. "Congratulations, Dad," I said. My voice carried more clearly than I expected. The microphone on the stage caught enough of it that the speakers hummed. 40 years is a long time to build a reputation." The room fell quiet. "You taught me many things. How people can call neglect discipline. How promises can be rewritten when they become inconvenient. How a family confuses silence with loyalty." My father's smile had vanished. Vivian sat frozen. Preston's face darkened. I raised the glass slightly higher. "So here is my toast to the last lesson I will ever take from this family." I looked directly at my father. "This is the last time any of you will see me." I set the glass down without drinking. Then I walked. Not fast, not dramatically, just steadily, through the ballroom, past the tables, past the flowers, past the people who had laughed because they thought I was powerless. My heels clicked against the floor. Nobody spoke. Nobody stopped me. By the time I reached the double doors, the silence behind me felt heavier than applause ever could. I was halfway across the parking lot when Vivian came after me. "Claire!" Her voice cracked through the night, no longer polished. "Stop right now!" I kept walking. She caught my arm near my car, a black Audi I had bought the previous year, and pulled me around. "Do you have any idea what you just did? You humiliated your father." I looked at her hand until she removed it. "No, Vivian, he humiliated himself. I simply declined to participate." My father appeared behind her, moving quickly for a man who cared deeply about looking composed. "Get back inside," he said. "You will apologize before this becomes worse." I almost smiled. "This already became worse. You just didn't notice because you were holding the microphone." "It was a joke." "It was a public summary of what you have always thought of me." His jaw flexed. "You are being unstable." There it was, the word they used when I refused to be convenient. "No," I said, "I am being finished." I opened my car door. My father stepped closer. If you leave like this, don't expect anything from me again. No support, no inheritance, no family safety net. This time I did laugh. Not loudly, but enough that both of them heard it. Dad, you cut the net when I was 20. You just kept pretending I was still standing under it. Vivian's face twisted. You will regret this. I got into the car. Not as much as you will. Then I drove away, leaving them in the country club lights, small and furious in the rearview mirror. For the first 20 minutes, I felt nothing. Then, at a rest area outside New Haven, I pulled into a parking space, turned off the engine, and put both hands over my face. I did not cry. I thought I would, but what came instead was breath. Deep, unsteady breath, like my body had been locked in a room for 12 years and someone had finally opened a window. I stayed there until the trembling passed. Then I drove back to Boston. By morning, the messages had begun. Cousins I had not heard from in years, family friends who had ignored every birthday, a former neighbor whose name I barely remembered. Claire, your father says you had a difficult evening. We're worried. Claire, Vivian says you might be under stress. Please don't isolate yourself. Claire, whatever happened, family is family. Maybe apologize before this gets out of hand. The machine was working exactly as expected. My father had turned himself into the wounded parent and me into the unstable daughter. It was almost impressive how quickly people accepted the familiar story. I did not respond. Silence had protected me before. Now it would protect my strategy. The first sign that they were frightened came on Tuesday afternoon. My office line rang and my assistant transferred a call from a man named Henry Lawson, one of Whitmore Freight's board members. His voice was smooth, cautious. Claire, I hope you don't mind me reaching out. I'm calling as a friend of your father's. That's already unfortunate, I said. He cleared his throat. There seems to be concern about misunderstandings between you and your family. Nathaniel is eager to resolve things. That sounds personal. Perhaps, though there have also been some unusual questions about Northline Strategy Group. I went very still. What kind of questions? Nothing concrete, he said quickly. Too quickly. Someone mentioned you might have had contact with them. Your father simply wants clarity. They were fishing. They did not know yet, but they had sensed a shape moving under the surface. I said, I have nothing to discuss with my father. Then I ended the call and walked into Elias's office. He looked up from his laptop and knew immediately. They're close? He asked. Close enough. He leaned back. Then we stopped waiting. He was right. The gala had decided the personal matter. Their fishing decided the business one. On Thursday, Vivian called my personal phone. I almost let it go to voicemail, but curiosity won. Claire, sweetheart, she began, using a voice so soft it could have tucked a knife into bed. I have been beside myself. Your father hasn't slept. That must be difficult for him. He feels terrible. Did he say that? A pause. He wants to move forward. That is not the same as feeling terrible. Her voice tightened. Must you make everything so adversarial? I looked out my office window at Boston Harbor, gray under the winter sky. No, that was a family tradition long before I had any power. She inhaled sharply. Power? Is that what this is about? Punishing us because your feelings were hurt years ago? My feelings were not hurt, Vivian. My education was taken. My mother's promise was broken. My adulthood was shaped by decisions all of you made and then pretended were practical. You are being dramatic, and you are being predictable. Another silence. Then her tone changed. The honey drained out. Whatever you think you're doing, be careful. People with unfinished degrees should not play games they don't understand. I smiled for the first time that day. You're right. I don't play games I don't understand. Then I hung up. The next morning, I met with Miriam Vale, my grandmother's attorney. Her office overlooked downtown Boston, all glass, walnut, and quiet competence. She had already reviewed the Northline Whitmore contract twice over the years, at my request. Now she spread the documents across the conference table. Service agreements, renewal clauses, termination provisions, ownership records, the trust instruments Beatrice had created. "You can terminate with 30 days' notice," Miriam said. "No cause required, no penalty, no exposure if performance obligations are met through the notice period. And if my father tries to challenge ownership, he has no basis." She tapped the trust documents. "Your grandmother anticipated that possibility. The trust was her separate property. The funds were transferred cleanly. Northline's corporate structure is equally clear. You are the sole owner." I stared at the signature lines, the legal language, the architecture of protection my grandmother had built around me without telling me. Did she ever say why she was so careful? Miriam's expression softened. "She said your father had a talent for confusing control with love. She wanted to make sure he could not reach what belonged to you." I looked down, blinking hard. "She also told me something else," Miriam added. "If this day came, she wanted me to tell you not to become cruel. Her exact words were, 'The truth will do enough damage. Claire does not need to add poison to it.'" That sounded like my grandmother. Sharp enough to cut bone, decent enough not to enjoy it. That afternoon, Elias and I sat in Northline's largest conference room, reviewing what termination would mean. The numbers were cold and merciless. Whitmore Freight had become dependent on our routing algorithms, vendor negotiations, and warehouse redesigns. We had not trapped them, we had done excellent work, and they had failed to develop internal redundancy because relying on us was easier. If Northline walked away, they would lose a huge portion of their efficiency within weeks. Their margins would shrink, deliveries would slow, clients would ask questions. Preston's first year as CEO would begin with a crisis he did not have the experience to manage. "We can renew," Elias said quietly. "Professionally, they are profitable. Personally, they are poison. You need to decide which fact matters more." I appreciated that about him. He never told me what choice would make me feel noble. He told me the cost. I thought of the ballroom, my father's smile, the laughter, my grandmother's letter, my mother's hospital voice. "Draft the termination," I said. "Clean, contractual, no emotion, strategic client portfolio adjustment." Elias nodded. "And the personal side? I'll handle that." I spent Sunday writing the letter. Not the legal notice, that was already done, clean and bloodless. I wrote the letter my father had earned. The first draft was too angry, the second was too long, the third sounded like I was still asking him to understand me. I deleted that one entirely. By midnight, I had a version that felt like standing upright. "Dear Dad, you told a room of people that I had no degree, no career, and no future. I want you to know the company you have called indispensable for the past 3 years is mine. Northline Strategy Group belongs to me. I built it without your help, without your money, and without the education you took from me. For 3 years, the daughter you dismissed has been strengthening the company you plan to hand to Preston. I am terminating our contract according to its terms. This is not revenge. It is a boundary. I will no longer allow my work to support people who publicly degrade me and privately rewrite my life to protect their pride. Grandma Beatrice knew what happened. She knew more than you thought she did. She protected me in the ways you refused to. I do not need an apology from you. I do not need recognition. I do not need a place at your table. I only need you to understand that I was never what you said I was. Do not contact me again. Claire Beatrice Whitmore. I signed with my middle name, the one I had legally added after my grandmother died. Then I placed a copy of Northline's incorporation documents behind the letter with my ownership clearly marked and sent the package by courier to Whitmore Freight headquarters. The calls began at 10:08 on Monday morning. My father first, then Preston, then Vivian, then my father again. Texts followed. Call me immediately. What is this? Do not make a decision you can't undo. Claire, stop this nonsense. By noon, there were 14 missed calls, 9 texts, and 3 voicemails. I listened to none of them. At 2:17, my assistant knocked on my office door. "Claire," she said carefully, "there are 3 people in reception asking to see you. They say they're your family." Of course they had driven to Boston. Panic is a powerful fuel. I looked at my reflection in the dark computer screen, adjusted my blazer, and said, "Put them in conference room B." I chose that room because the walls were glass. My employees could not hear, but they could see. Not because I wanted humiliation, because people like my father behave differently when there are witnesses they cannot control. They were standing when I entered. My father looked older than he had at the gala, as if the truth had aged him in a weekend. Vivian clutched her handbag with both hands. Preston paced near the window, anger radiating off him like heat. I took the chair at the head of the table. It was a small thing, but not to me. "Good afternoon," I said. "I assume you received the package?" Preston slammed his palm on the table. "You think this is funny?" "Sit down," I said. He stared at me stunned. I had never spoken to him like that. "This is my office," I continued. "You will sit or you will leave." My father gave him a sharp look. Preston sat. For several seconds, nobody spoke. Then my father pushed a folder toward me as if it were contaminated. "Explain this." "Which part confused you?" "Northline," he said. "You expect me to believe you built Northline Strategy Group?" "No," I said. "I don't expect anything from you. But yes, I built it." Vivian's lips parted. "But you never finished college." "That is true." "Then how could you possibly—" "Learn?" I asked. "Work? Think? Build? Strange how many things people can do when nobody is paying attention." My father opened the incorporation papers again. His eyes moved over my name, the dates, the signatures. I could see him searching for fraud, for a loophole, for some way the world could still make sense with him above me. "Why didn't you tell us?" Vivian asked. The question was so absurd I almost laughed. "When would you have listened?" "We're your family." "You're the people who told everyone I was unstable because I refused to be insulted." Preston leaned forward. "Do you understand what happens if Northline terminates? Do you understand how many people could lose jobs because of your little emotional tantrum?" "I understand the contract better than you do." His face reddened. "This is revenge." "No. Revenge would have been exposing you at the gala. Revenge would have been correcting Dad publicly when he mocked me in front of 200 people. Revenge would have been telling that room that his company's success depended on the woman he called a freeloader. I did not do that. I left." My father looked up sharply. He knew I was right, and he hated me for making him know it. He changed tactics. Men like my father always do when intimidation fails. "Claire," he said, softer now, almost paternal, "I was wrong to joke the way I did. I apologize." It should have meant something. Once it would have meant everything. But an apology offered with a contract bleeding on the table is not remorse. It is strategy. "You're sorry because you need me," I said. "That is not the same as being sorry because you hurt me." His softness vanished. "Don't be childish." There he was, the real man under the performance. "I am ending a business relationship through a legal provision both companies agreed to," I said. "There is nothing childish about that." Vivian's eyes filled with tears, perfectly timed. "I tried to be a mother to you." "No," I said gently. "You tried to replace one. There is a difference." She flinched as if I had slapped her. Preston muttered something under his breath. I looked at him. "Say it clearly." He did not. Then my father said the thing I had expected. "If you do this, you are out of this family permanently." I folded my hands on the table. "Dad, I walked out of that ballroom because I had already accepted that. No inheritance, no name, no access, nothing. I keep threatening to take away things I have lived without for 12 years. His face hardened. "I can make this difficult for you. I have lawyers, I have relationships. You also have a signed contract, a termination clause, and no legal claim to my company." I slid Miriam's card across the table. "Any further communication can go through counsel." He stared at the card. Then Vivian noticed the name. "Miriam Vale," she whispered. "Beatrice's attorney?" "Yes." My father's face went pale. I opened another folder and removed a copy of the trust summary. "Grandma knew what you did. She knew about the education money. She knew enough to protect me from future interference." "That money was family money," he snapped. "It was hers," I said, "and she chose me." The room went silent in a way that felt final. My father looked less angry for a moment and more wounded, but not because he had hurt me, because someone he respected had judged him and planned around his worst instincts. I stood. "This meeting is over." Preston shot up. "You don't get to end this." "I just did." I walked to the door and opened it. "If any of you contact me again outside legal channels, I will treat it as harassment. If you attempt to damage Northline's reputation, I will release documentation showing exactly why I ended the relationship. I have emails, I have records. I have enough." Vivian's tears disappeared. My father rose slowly. At the doorway, he stopped in front of me. "You hate us that much?" His voice was quiet, almost human. For a second, I saw the father I had wanted, not the father I had, but the one a child invents to survive disappointment. "No," I said, "I don't hate you. Hate would keep me tied to you. I'm done being tied." He had no answer. They walked through reception past my employees, who suddenly found their screens fascinating. When the elevator doors closed behind them, I returned to my office, sat down, and stared at my hands until they stopped shaking. Then I opened my laptop and went back to work. That was the first day of the rest of my life, though it did not feel victorious. It felt clean. There is a difference. The consequences came slowly at first, then all at once. Whitmore Freight announced a restructuring 2 months after Northline's contract ended. The press release blamed market volatility, labor cost, and transitional inefficiencies. Anyone in logistics could read between the lines. Their routes were slipping. Their margins were thinning. 2 major clients delayed renewals. One moved to a competitor. Preston, who had taken over as CEO with champagne still drying on his reputation, was suddenly answering questions he was not equipped to answer. My father returned as an executive advisor, which everyone understood meant emergency adult supervision. The layoffs came in December. 63 employees. I read the article 3 times and felt no joy. That surprised me. I thought I might feel satisfaction. Instead, I felt the old heaviness of knowing that people without power often pay for the pride of people who have too much of it. I had not caused my father to build a company dependent on a partner he did not bother to understand. I had not forced him to humiliate me publicly. Still, consequences rarely land only on the guilty. That was one of the hardest lessons of the entire thing. The reputation damage was worse for my father than the financial damage. In towns like Westport and industries like his, people forgive incompetence if it is profitable. They forgive arrogance if it wins. They do not forgive being made to look foolish. 200 guests had watched him mock me. Within weeks, those same guests heard whispers that I owned Northline. Nobody needed me to tell the story. The room had already seen the first half. The business community supplied the second. Did you hear Nathaniel's daughter owns the firm that saved Whitmore? Did you hear he called her a freeloader? Did you hear Beatrice left her money to Claire? Did you hear there was an education fund? That last whisper reached me through my Uncle Malcolm, my mother's younger brother, who called one evening from Vermont. I had not spoken to him in years. My father had made sure my mother's side faded from my life after she died. Malcolm's voice was rough with regret. "Claire," he said, "there's something you deserve to know. Your mother left money for your education." I closed my eyes. Some part of me had known. Some part had been waiting for the words. "How much?" I asked. "Enough for 4 years anywhere, maybe graduate school too if invested properly." My throat tightened. "What happened to it?" He was quiet for a long time. "Nathaniel moved it. He said it was necessary for family stability. Some of it went toward Preston's MBA. Some went into the company during a cash crunch. Beatrice found out later. She was furious." The room around me seemed to tilt. My father had not merely chosen Preston over me. He had used my mother's last act of love to fund it. After that call, I sat on my kitchen floor until the sky outside went dark. I thought about my mother in a hospital bed, fighting pain to secure my future. I thought about my father sitting across from me in his study, saying circumstances change. I thought about Vivian telling me I could marry well. I thought about Preston calling me weak. Grief came then, but not for the family I had lost, for the girl I had been at 20, packing her dorm room believing there had simply not been enough money. She had blamed herself for being too expensive, too inconvenient, too easy to cut. I wished I could reach back through time and tell her, "It was not you. It was never you." Miriam later confirmed what Malcolm told me. The original documents were difficult to obtain, but not impossible. Legally, the matter was complicated by time, transfers, and the way my father had structured everything. Emotionally, it was simple. My mother had tried to leave me choices. My father had taken them. My grandmother had spent her final years putting a shield where a door should have been. People ask whether I sued. I did not. Not because he deserved peace, but because I deserved mine. Miriam explained what a legal battle would require: years of discovery, public filings, depositions, arguments over intent, records my father might have buried or blurred. I had already spent too much of my life orbiting his choices. I decided the truth was enough. But I did send one final legal letter through Miriam, not to my father directly, but to his counsel. It stated that I knew about the education fund, that I had documentation supporting its existence, and that any further attempt to harass, defame, or interfere with me or Northline would result in a broader disclosure. After that, the calls stopped. Vivian stopped sending messages through relatives. Preston stopped making vague threats through industry contacts. My father became silent. True silence, not the old kind that erased me, but the kind that meant he had finally found a wall he could not buy, charm, or threaten his way through. 6 months after the gala, I began therapy. Not because I was weak, because I was tired of being strong in the shape my family had forced on me. Dr. Anika Rao had an office in Beacon Hill with soft chairs and no inspirational quotes on the walls, which I appreciated. During our first session, she asked what brought me in. I said, "I won." She waited. I laughed because it sounded absurd. "I won, and I don't know why it still hurts." That became the center of our work. We talked about invisible childhoods, conditional belonging, the addiction to proving people wrong, and the strange loneliness that follows when you finally stop performing for people who never plan to applaud. I learned that survival skills can become cages. Silence had protected me, but it had also kept me from asking for comfort. Independence had saved me, but it had also convinced me that needing people was dangerous. I had built a company, a life, a name. Now I had to build a self that was not only a response to my father. Outside therapy, my life grew in ways I had not expected. Northline thrived after leaving Whitmore. Losing one large client forced us to diversify, and that made us stronger. Elias became a partner. We hired a new analytics team and moved into a larger office with windows that caught the morning light. I began mentoring young women in operations and logistics, especially the ones without perfect resumes. When a candidate told me she had left school to support family and worried it made her less credible, I hired her. Not out of charity, because I knew the difference between a missing credential and a missing mind. I reconnected with my mother's brother, Malcolm, and through him I learned who my mother had been beyond the soft focus memories. She had been stubborn, funny, brilliant with numbers, bad at baking but convinced enthusiasm could save any cake. "You're like her," Malcolm told me over dinner one night. I had to excuse myself to the restroom because I could not cry in front of the waiter. I visit my grandmother's grave once a month. That may sound dramatic, but grief has its rituals, and some of them keep us honest. I bring white tulips because she hated roses and said they were flowers trying too hard. I tell her about Northline, about therapy, about the employees she would have liked, about the days when I still hear my father's voice in my head and answer it with my own. Sometimes I tell my mother things too, though she is buried in a different cemetery beside a family that did not protect her wishes. I tell her I know now. I tell her I am sorry her gift was stolen. I tell her I built a life anyway. The first time I said that aloud, I broke down. The second time, I believed it. As for my father, I have seen him only once since that meeting in my office. It was almost a year later at a charity luncheon in Boston. I was there with a client. He was across the room, thinner, quieter, standing beside Vivian while people drifted around them with careful politeness. Preston was not there. I later heard he had stepped down as CEO after the board appointed an outside executive to stabilize the company. My father saw me near the exit. For a moment, he looked as if he might approach. I did not move. I did not smile. I did not flee. I simply stood in my own life and let him decide what kind of man he wanted to be in public. He looked away first. Years ago, that would have shattered me. That day, it told me everything I needed to know. Some people would rather lose you forever than face the full weight of what they did to you. That is not your failure. It is their limitation. I want to be clear about something. This is not a story about revenge, even if it may sound like one from the outside. Revenge is when you try to become the pain someone gave you. Boundaries are when you refuse to keep carrying it for them. I did not end the contract because I wanted my father destroyed. I ended it because my work, my mind, and my life no longer belonged in service of people who denied my worth while benefiting from it. If the truth damaged him, it was because he had built his image on a lie. If the company suffered, it was because its leadership had confused inherited confidence with competence. If the family fractured, it was because the cracks had always been there, hidden under polished floors and catered dinners. I simply stopped standing over them like a rug. There are still hard days. Anyone who tells you walking away from family feels only empowering is selling you something. Sometimes freedom feels like grief with better lighting. Sometimes I hear a song my mother loved and feel 8 years old again. Sometimes I wonder what kind of woman I might have become if I had been loved without competition, supported without conditions, believed without proof. But I do not live there. I visit, I mourn, and I leave. The life I have now is not perfect, but it is mine. My apartment is quiet in the mornings. My friends know the real story. My company does work I respect. I have people who ask how I am and wait long enough for the honest answer. That is wealth too, maybe the truest kind. If you are listening to this because you are the Claire in your family, the one they misunderstand because misunderstanding you protects their version of events, I want you to hear me. You are not required to stay small so other people can remain comfortable. You are not obligated to keep attending gatherings where your pain is served as entertainment. You do not have to keep explaining your worth to people who benefit from denying it. A degree can be stolen. Money can be withheld. Years can be redirected. But the part of you that knows you were meant for more is not foolish. It is evidence. Protect it. Feed it. Build with it. And when the day comes, when they finally see what you have become, you do not have to hand them a seat at the table they tried to keep you from building. My father thought that retirement gala would be the night he defined me in front of everyone. He was wrong. It became the night I stopped letting him. For years, I believed being invisible had ruined me. Now I understand it trained me. I learned to watch. I learned to listen. I learned to build without applause. I learned that people who underestimate you often give you the one thing they should fear most: time without interference. And when I finally walked out of that ballroom, I was not walking away from family. I was walking away from the lie that people can break you and still deserve unlimited access to what remains. So this is where my story ends, at least for now. Not with a dramatic reconciliation, not with my father crying on my doorstep, not with Vivian admitting what she did or Preston suddenly respecting me. Some endings are quieter than that. Some endings are a woman unlocking her office in the morning, looking at the name on the door and knowing no one gave it to her. Some endings are unanswered calls, peaceful holidays, chosen family around a table, and the absence of dread. Some endings are not about getting justice from the people who hurt you. They are about becoming whole enough that their refusal to understand no longer controls the room inside your chest. Thank you for listening to my story. If it reminded you of someone who needs to hear that they are not what their family called them, share it with them. Leave a comment and tell me where this found you, especially if you have ever had to choose peace over belonging. Subscribe to After Silence Stories for more stories about betrayal, truth, family, and the strength it takes to walk away. I'll see you in the next episode.